For all these years, people have saluted Elizabeth with "Long live the Queen." But few expected she lived this long. At 96, she's now celebrating 70 years on the throne, becoming the second longest-serving monarch in history, right behind Louis XIV of France, who reigned for 72 years. And all that hoopla got me thinking that I can't remember a time without Queen Elizabeth. She's been on the throne my entire life. And it's no exaggeration to say she shaped my earliest understanding of royalty, and some of that bled into my perception of God as a king, especially when I was a kid. Now, the sovereignty of God is a lot more complicated, but we can learn a lot about him by examining his kingship. So that's what we're going to do. To set the stage, let's remember that kings and queens are all over the Bible, including the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses II, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon or ancient Iraq, and King Artaxerxes of Persia or ancient Iran. Some kings ruled over entire empires. Others controlled a single city, which is why Joshua had to conquer 31 kings to take the land of Canaan. In early Israel, the nation was ruled by prophets, priests, and judges. It wasn't until the land was under siege by the Ammonites from what's now Jordan that the people began to clamor for a king like the nations around them, especially because the sons of their leader, the prophet Samuel, were corrupt.
What do you want?
A king.
A king?
Who will speak to the Lord after you?
God was not pleased by the request, framing the move as a lack of trust in him. And through Samuel, he tells the Israelites exactly what's going to happen. The king will draft your sons for his army, or force them to plow in his fields, or make his weapons. He'll force your daughters to cook and bake, take away the best of your fields and crops and give them to his own officials, and demand the finest of your animals for his own use. You will be his slaves. You'll beg for relief, but God will not help you. But the people said, "Even so, we want a king. We want to be like the nations around us." Some things never change. And of course, that prophecy came true. My first point is that many people today still don't trust God and put any number of substitutes on the thrones of their lives. It's like the monarchy. Many people in the Commonwealth don't support it. They don't have any loyalty or allegiance to Elizabeth, and they don't want their tax dollars supporting her. They think the crown is outdated and irrelevant, which is precisely the way many see God. They reject him and want to be just like everybody else around them. For other people, the sovereign is nothing more than a symbol. They like Queen Elizabeth okay, but she seems far removed from daily life, unnecessary, and of ceremonial importance at best. In short, those people seldom think about the crown unless there's a crisis. And that, too, is a perfect description of how many treat God. But even they give their loyalty, attention, and priority to someone or something. Maybe they're ruled by their single-minded devotion to family, or work, or money. Or maybe it's their devotion to status, sports, a hobby or collection, movies and television, or even church work, which doesn't necessarily have anything to do with God. It's amazing to me how many people say they don't want God and the church telling them what to do, yet they're heavily influenced in what they think and how they act by Hollywood personalities, rock star politicians, financial tycoons, online influencers, lifestyle gurus, and maybe even their favorite musicians. They follow their lead and buy their stuff, all the while asserting their independence. And as God said, people pay a heavy price for that misplaced allegiance when celebrities let them down or fail to bring meaning to life. The Bible is clear God alone is to be sovereign. The psalmist says, "Listen to my cry for help, my King and my God, for I pray to no one but you. The Lord is King forever and ever, but the godless will vanish." And Paul echoes that in the New Testament. "All honor and glory to God forever and ever," he writes. "He is the eternal King, the unseen one who never dies. He alone is God." And that extends to Jesus, who claimed sovereignty but said his kingdom was not of this world. Just as Israel's king was called the Lord's anointed or chosen one in 1 Kings 1 verse 9, so was Jesus. The prophet Isaiah described the coming Messiah as a king who would ride triumphantly into Jerusalem, which is why Jesus rode into the city on a donkey, which in those days was a symbol of royal power when a sovereign came in peace. So who or what is on the throne of your life?
Power is a curious thing. It's a trick.
There's a spiritual equivalent to the Game of Thrones, which is about an epic struggle for power and control. That's why the Bible treats the influence of Satan seriously, calling him the prince of this world, the commander of the powers in the unseen world, the spirit at work in the hearts of those who refuse to obey God. As we saw last week, we're to put on our spiritual armor to thwart his strategies. But he's not the only threat. We have to look out for pride, envy, jealousy, a sense of entitlement, the need for control, excessive self-reliance, and a craving for approval, popularity, and power. The first kings of Israel illustrate those dangers perfectly. The nation's first king was Saul, who got to be a mighty warrior after initially being so intimidated by the prospect of power that he hid among the camels and horses on his coronation day. That lack of confidence grew into pride and arrogance so deep that God tore the kingdom from him. And things got even worse when he became jealous of David's military prowess and popularity.
God is with me!
Though David was a man after God's own heart, he let his lust induce him into adultery with Bathsheba, leading to murder and a cover-up. Later, his son Solomon would extend the kingdom with unparalleled wealth and power, but not before two of David's other sons tried to topple the rightful sovereign and take the throne for themselves. It didn't work. But what they couldn't do, Solomon almost did to himself, by allowing his many wives to introduce false gods and idols throughout the land. Half of David's kids brought disgrace and dishonor to the throne and to him by the way they lived. And I see in that a modern parallel to us. There are lots of people today who will never give God a second thought because they see how his kids are living. We are children of the King, and everything we do reflects back on him, whether good or bad. We'll either usher people into the kingdom or chase them away by our actions.
Developing headline involving Prince Andrew.
Facing a new lawsuit for alleged sexual abuse.
Virginia Roberts Giuffre, one of Jeffrey Epstein's accusers, has filed a lawsuit against the 61-year-old prince, claiming that he sexually abused her on multiple occasions when she was a teenager.
Even today, the actions of some royals are poisoning the support and perhaps even the future of the royal family. It's the same in the spiritual realm. So we need to be loyal subjects, supporting the headship of our ruler by recognizing his authority, obeying his laws, extending the kingdom in any way we can, and defending it against threats of any kind. For that, we'll need God's power to find love and humility mixed with courage, obedience, and absolute confidence in our King. And there's another lesson we can learn from today's royal reality. At 96, it's inevitable the Queen will die in the not-too-distant future. Presumably, her son Charles will be at the bedside of his dying mother. When he rises from it, his siblings will kiss his hand to acknowledge his ascension to the throne. According to a plan made in the 1960s called Operation London Bridge, the first public official to be told of the Queen's death will be her private secretary, Edward Young. After that, using the code phrase, "London Bridge is down," the British Prime Minister will be notified, followed by leaders of the 15 countries where the Queen is head of state, including Canada. Then the leaders of 36 other nations in the Commonwealth. The public won't know anything until the media are alerted and a footman crosses the pink gravel in front of Buckingham Palace to pin a black-framed death notice on the front gates. It's a good reminder that the realm we belong to will never pass away, ruled by a king who is eternal, powerful, and faithful. Anything else you can place your loyalty in will disappear. How great are his signs, writes Daniel, and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation, forever. So, more's the pity that so many people remain so distant from his love and power. But it's not because he's aloof, unapproachable, or hard to know. Let me show you what I mean with a story about Queen Elizabeth by her former bodyguard, Richard Griffin.
One of the picnics I went out with her, we had a lovely picnic and a lovely chat, and then we went for a little walk, just the two of us. And normally, on these picnic sites, you meet nobody, but there was two hikers coming towards us, and the Queen would always stop and say hello. And it was two Americans on a walking holiday. And it was clear from the moment that we first stopped, they hadn't recognised the Queen, which is fine. And the American gentleman was telling the Queen where he came from, where they were going to next, and where they'd been to in Britain. And I could see it coming, and sure enough, he said to Her Majesty, "And where do you live?" And she said, "Well, I live in London, but I've got a holiday home just the other side of the hills." And he said, "Well, how often have you been coming up here?" "Oh," she said, "I've been coming up here ever since I was a little girl, so over 80 years. And you could see the clogs thinking. He said, "Well, if you've been coming up here for 80 years, you must have met the Queen." And as quick as a flash says, "Well, I haven't, but Dick here meets her regularly." So the guy said to me, "Oh, you've met the Queen, what's she like?" And because I was with her a long time and I knew I could pull a leg, I said, "Oh, she can be very cantankerous at times, but she's got a lovely sense of humour." Anyway, the next thing I knew, this guy comes around, puts his arm around my shoulder, and before I could see what was happening, he gets his camera, gives it to the Queen, and says, "Can you take a picture of the two of us?" Anyway, we swapped places, and I took a picture of them with the Queen, and we never let on, and we waved goodbye. And then Her Majesty said to me, "I'd love to be a fly on the wall when he shows those photographs to the friends in America, and hopefully someone tells him who I am."
Oh, that's brilliant.
In much the same way, God is always among his people, but we often remain unaware, either because we don't know him well enough to recognize him, or we're caught up in our own self-centered little world, or we're focused on things that are much less important. That happens in the church too. We often get so caught up in people who know God well that we miss out on our own personal and meaningful encounters with him. God is never going to force himself on anyone, but he must sometimes shake his head at how oblivious we are to things that are truly important. So there you have it. The primary lessons are: many see the king as outdated and irrelevant, or useful only as a ceremonial symbol. But he holds our lives in his hands, and we are completely dependent on his love and grace. So don't put anything else on the throne of your life. Second, too many of the king's children try to take the throne for themselves for purely selfish reasons, and it never ends well. Don't be led into rebellion by pride, entitlement, self-reliance, or a need for control. We stand for resurrection, not insurrection. Third, many people reject God because of the bad behavior of the king's kids. So do everything you can to honor God with your love, loyalty, and lifestyle. You are God's representative, his royal envoy. So live like it. Fourth, remember, God's reign will never end, and one day you'll stand in his throne room for an audience about eternity. Be ready. And last, the king is already much closer than you think, so keep your eyes and hearts open so you don't miss your own personal encounters with the sovereign of the universe. You have to know him, not just know about him, if you want to see him at work in your life. Keep those principles in mind, and nothing will be outside the realm of possibility.